October 13th, 2022 meeting of the Parker Planning Commission to order at 7 p.m. Please stand and join us for the Pledge of Allegiance. Eric will lead us.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Roll call. Absent is Ileana. Absent is Nick. I think of the third one.
Rich.
And absent is Rich. It looks like Ira is seated for, who sits over there? Ileana, and Jane's seated for Rich. Okay. And are there any additions to or deletions from the agenda?
No, sir, there are not.
All right, the minutes. Are there any additions or corrections to the minutes from the meeting of September 22nd, 2022?
No.
No.
Okay, do we have a motion to approve?
I move we approve the minutes from September 22nd, 2022.
Second.
It's been moved by Ruth Ann, seconded by Eric, that we approve the Planning Commission meetings from September 22nd, 2022, and I'll call the question. Kim?
Aye.
Ira?
Aye.
Eric?
Aye.
Ruth Ann?
Aye.
Roxy?
Aye.
Jane?
Aye.
Chair is aye. It passes unanimously. Public hearing, item number 7. A draft ordinance to amend sections 13.01.140, 13.04.240, 13.07.080, 13.07.090, and 13.07.100 of the Parker Municipal Code concerning expirations of approval. We will open the public hearing at 7:02. And Bryce?
Yep. Thank you, Chair, members of the Planning Commission. As noted before you tonight is a proposed ordinance to amend the Parker Municipal Code regarding the expiration of approvals. So the LDO establishes the amount of time that a land use application is in effect. Applicants must record documents or get permits within those time periods. If the applicant does not act and does not get the required documents recorded or the permits, the application or the approval expires, and then the applicant has to resubmit from the beginning and go back through the process. So our current code has all plat approvals have an expiration of 90 days after the approval letter, and there's an allowance for a 30-day administrative extension. Within that timeline, they must submit the Mylar and provide security for any public improvements. Use by special reviews, approval period before expiration is 12 months, and there's a 90-day extension, and they need to get a building permit or grading permit within that time frame. On top of a use by special review, there's almost always a site plan that is required, which is a separate process. Speaking of site plans are, their approval timelines are for 12 months, and there's a 90-day administrative extension. So there are a few issues with the current code. One is that there are no extensions past an administrative extension in the code. The only mechanism an applicant has, if they've gone through the regular timeline, the administrative, is to request a waiver from town council. Now, while this is legally and technically okay, it is really not a very thoughtful way to think about how to extend projects. Also, we've experienced that there's not enough time for somebody who gets a use by special review approval, often to get through the site plan process, which includes hiring their consultants, getting their consultants to complete their work, to submit it to the town, get approval from the town, and get to a position where they can get permits within that time frame. And then the last is for larger projects. So think Trails of Crowfoot, Anthology North, Looking Glass, these large projects that will have multiple final plats going through at the same time. 90 days is often not enough time to address issues like financing, figuring out security for millions of dollars, and then just kind of timing these documents as they get recorded. Often there are up to 9 final plats kind of going concurrently that are tied to the same financing package, even though the development will be a little bit staggered. So proposed changes, staff has analyzed the code, kind of been thoughtful about what we've seen and issues that have come up, and are proposing a few things. One is establish longer initial approval timelines. Second is establish longer administrative timelines. And then last is create a formal process for town council to approve extensions with criteria that actually relate to the issues at hand versus a waiver which is, has a broad bar of public interest. Next slide, please. Oh, never mind. I forgot I had control. Got to remember I'm driving. So proposed changes for plats. The approval would be 180 days, so it would be from approval to expiration be 180 days. The applicant could request another 180-day extension, and then the town council, subject to criteria, could extend it up to another 12 months. For 4 or more final plats, so this is kind of the big projects we were talking about, where they're running concurrently, the approval timeline would be extended to 12 months, administrative extension 12 months, and then town council extension up to 18 months. Use by special review, as mentioned, particularly with use by special reviews and having to go through the site plan process and get your permitting and all that during the time frame, we're recommending that it be 24 months for the approval period, and then administrative extensions of 180 days, and then up to 12 months for town council extension. And then site plan, 15 months approval period, 180 days for administrative extension, and then town council extension up to 12 months. So really what these proposed changes would do would allow approved projects more time to address what are often complicated technical and financial issues, also including sometimes state and federal permitting, which sometimes is out of the developer's control. Allow larger projects with multiple final plats time to deal with the more complicated financial and infrastructure components to get those into place. Allow applicants who've received a use by special review more time to complete their design, to get their site plan and engineering figured out, and to get all the way to permitting. And then lastly, establish a formal process for town council to extend approvals. With that, staff recommends, the Planning Commission recommend that town council approve an ordinance regarding amending the land development ordinance concerning the expiration of approvals. As always, I'm available for any questions you may have.
Questions for Bryce?
I have just one quick question regarding the language in the ordinance itself. In the first section, you reference just generally the criteria set forth in the title, and yet in subsequent sections, you laid out the specific criteria, which appeared to be the same. And I was just I just want to make sure that the same criteria that applies in each of the other sections is what you're referring to in that subject to the criteria in this title. In section, I can give you the section number if you needed to find it.
Yeah, that would actually be really helpful. I
Okay,
appreciate it.
it's in section 1D. So under section 1, resubmittals and expiration of approvals, as you scan down and go to the top of the second page, second paragraph,
Okay.
it just says, subject to the criteria set forth in this title. It does not have the specificity that the other sections had, and I want to make sure that that wasn't, A, an oversight, and B, that what appeared to me to be identical criteria repeated later in the title are the criteria you're speaking of when you're referencing that.
So the criteria for town council extensions are the same.
Okay.
Depending on the different processes. I'll actually take a look at this with the town attorney just to make sure there's consistency
Yeah,
in that
I think
language.
that would be a good idea.
I appreciate it.
Other questions for Bryce?
No.
Okay. And as this is a public hearing, we open the hearing up for comment from the public. We ask that you limit your comment to 3 minutes and not necessarily repeat what other people have said. And so we will open it up to public comment on this item before us. Seeing none, we will close the public comment portion of the meeting. Any other further questions?
No.
Okay, then we will close the public hearing at 7:11. Commissioner discussion.
Fairly straightforward. We understand some of the timing constraints of some of these items, and I think this addresses them appropriately. I'm in support.
I agree. Working with land use permits, I think this falls in line with what I've seen is more common, because it does take a long time to get through some of this stuff. So I appreciate the fact that you guys are looking at this and extending it. So yes, I too will be in support.
I agree, and I think this is obviously more preferable to waiving it, right? So giving a reasonable time frame seems like a great alternative.
I agree. I'm in support. I think it's a very common sense thing to do, especially given the financial and structural things that people are dealing with in terms of development these days. My only concern was the criteria. I think the criteria, I'm in support of the criteria for town council. I think it gives them some good guardrails for how to make those decisions, and I just want to make sure it's consistent all the way through the document. But I am in support.
Yeah, and I'm also in support. Bryce, I appreciate it. I think it was well spelled out in the staff report. I think it's timely, especially now with rising rates, difficulty obtaining materials and things like that. I think we will see further delays in development, especially through the permitting process, and I think this is going to address that.
I would concur with my fellow planning commissioners. I think the staggered approvals is a good way to do it, so that there is a standard, and then if you can't meet that, then you ask for administrative approval for an extension, and if that is not enough, then there's an additional option. So I like that it is staggered in that way, so that we don't have approvals hanging out for a long baseline period, but that there is enough time for people to work through the process when necessary.
I would agree with the thoughts of the commissioners and see it again as a timely cleanup of language here. And do we have a motion?
I move the Planning Commission recommend Town Council approve an ordinance to amend the Parker Municipal Code regarding expirations of approvals.
I'll second.
It's been moved by Eric, seconded by Roxy, that Planning Commission recommend Town Council approve an ordinance to amend the Parker Municipal Code regarding expirations of approval. I will call the question. Kim?
Aye.
Ira?
Aye.
Eric?
Aye.
Ruth Ann?
Aye.
Roxy?
Aye.
Jane?
Aye.
Chair is aye. Passes unanimously.
Thank you.
Next item on our agenda is item 7B, a draft ordinance to amend section 13.10.090 of the Parker Municipal Code concerning utilities. And we will open the public hearing at 7:15. And John, we're all yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Planning Commissioners. I'm here as indicated on an ordinance proposing to amend a provision of the municipal code, section 131090, regarding utilities. We do have in the audience, Mr. Chairman, several representatives of CORE, which is the town's electric service provider, and I expect that at least one, if not more, of those representatives may have comments for you at the appropriate point in the hearing. I apologize for the text. Old habits die hard. So by way of background, as you know, new development in the town requires that applicants, the town, meaning town staff principally, and utility providers coordinate the location and design of utility service to individual lots. Particularly, we're talking about residential development in the main. In most cases, in the past, side and rear yard utility easements have been used for that service to individual lots, individual residential lots, including electric service. This has been and continues to be the town's design preference, the use of side and rear yard utility easements for that important service. The town's, this ordinance and the proposed code amendments are driven by a concern initiated by CORE, where they recently proposed a revision to their policy and standards for the location and design of electric service to promote, those are my words, CORE representative may have some comments on this, the use of front yard utility easements, again, for service to individual lots. Here, I'll pause to let the commission know that town staff met with CORE staff yesterday on the ordinance and the proposed code amendments by request of CORE's outside counsel to the town attorney's office. I would characterize the meeting as productive. There was no resolution and certainly no town staff recommendation to change or pause on the ordinance, but I am hopeful that that conversation between town staff and CORE staff will continue both through this hearing, the upcoming town council hearing Monday, and perhaps after that. So back to the ordinance. The town, CORE's proposed policy change and standards change, which they've advised us they've rescinded and are not changing, precipitated a few issues that caught town council's attention and the town staff's attention. And those issues are recited at 1 through 6 in the presentation and in your staff report. We're concerned that the use of front yard utility easements in the future may conflict with town policies, practices, and standards regarding utility location and design. The second concern is that the use of such front yard utility easements would create a negative visual impact through the potential proliferation of above-ground equipment in front yards, such as pedestals and transformers. Thirdly, we have a concern that the use of front yard easements, should they come to pass, would detract from residential quality of life by diminishing community standards and expectations for new development, because it would limit the amount and type of landscaping that could be placed in a residential front yard within that front yard utility easement. Following, the town and town staff also have concern that the use of front yard utility easements would have a detrimental impact on community character which the town council and the planning commission take seriously, because new residential development may be of a lesser design quality and standard if there's front yard easements with above-ground equipment proliferating through new residential development, contrary to most already developed neighborhoods and developments in town. Moving on, the use of a front yard utility easement at the individual lot level, particularly with residential development, would also impede and potentially limit the town's efforts to promote a desirable visual environment, which is a major goal and recommendation both in code and the Parker 2035 master plan with new residential development for some of the reasons I mentioned, including limitations on landscaping and proliferation of above-ground equipment in front yard utility easements. And then finally, at number 6, the town's current municipal code at subsection 131090 for utilities currently has limited standards to support the town's design preference that I've previously mentioned. So in response to these concerns and these issues, the town council directed staff, led by the Community Development Department, to prepare Ordinance 3.362 in consultation with the town attorney's office, which would amend the land development ordinance section of code to address those issues by way of additional standards. It's not my intention here, Mr. Chairman, to recite the ordinance revisions in the main. Those are in the staff report. You should have them with you. But if you wish that I go through them, I'm happy to do that. I was just going to summarize.
No, I'm,
Summary is acceptable, yeah.
yeah, I've read it.
Thank you. So, by way of summary, proposed ordinance 3.362 for amendments to the utility standards in code would, number one, maintain existing standards, which, as I indicated, are very limited currently. It would add new standards to require the use of side and rear yard utility easements for utility service to the individual lot level. Finally, it includes an option, albeit limited, for an applicant to request a modification or waiver of the standards if there's a hardship. And with regard to that hardship, the language and the bar for approving of a hardship is pretty high as it's currently constructed in code. It's related to any unique and exceptional kind of topographic and physical characteristics of a property. So think steep slopes, ridge line, floodplain, et cetera. And it would not allow an applicant to seek a hardship waiver or variation if they've imposed or created their own hardship. It's related to the property. So I will say it's a high bar, but it's one that's already embedded in code, including the land development ordinance. The town and town staff believe that the proposed ordinance and code amendments have several benefits. One, it would support the town's design preference for the use of side and rear yard utility easements for utility service to individual lots, particularly residential lots. It provides additional clarity about the town's policy and standards for such utility service design to individual lots for applicants, the public, and utility service providers. And that clarity doesn't currently exist in code. And then finally, it would protect the town in the event a utility provider changes their utility design approach and/or standards in the future by having the standards in the municipal code. I've been living with this issue and this code amendment for a couple months now, and it still takes me some time to wrap my head around it, so I thought an image would help. It certainly would help me in describing the code amendment. So in front of you, we have an example that I've entitled Utility Easement Location and Design. I could not find a good example, nor did I have time to create a similar issue that had labels saying easement, but I found an image here that you can see on your screen that shows a typical lot, residential lot with a typical home, actually two homes, two lots, two homes. And then you see a delineation of setbacks, so front yard setback, side yard setback, or rear yard setback. So think about side yard and rear yard setbacks as kind of coincident with utility easements. And so for the purposes of what the town's trying to accomplish by the ordinance and the code amendment, we're seeking to have standards that require applicants and providers to run their utility infrastructure on an individual lot down one side yard utility easement. Typically in Parker, that utility easement is coterminous with a side yard setback. They're basically one and the same, or substantially similar in that regard. Think about the rear yard setback as coterminous with a rear yard utility easement. They're not quite the same thing, but at least on the graphic, they tell the picture about the location of those easements. So the town is trying to accomplish by these additional standards clarity and a requirement that applicants and utility providers, again, generally design with residential development in particular, to have utilities and the easements required for them run down a side yard and utility easement, and also a rear yard utility easement. The standards allow equipment to be above ground, provided it's in the rear yard utility easement, and in some limited circumstances in the side yard utility easement, if the equipment for some reason can't be located in the rear yard utility easement. So again, the whole point is clarity, is to embed in code kind of the town's preference, policies, and practices that we followed with our utility partners, including but not limited to CORE, for many years now, and to make sure the code reflects, again, the town's preference and the policy we wish to express in regulation. So that's kind of what we're at and what we're after. Second example here, this is an example of what we're trying to address and avoid by virtue of this ordinance and the code amendment for the location and design of utility easements. We're looking to avoid utility easements that have with them above-ground equipment in a front yard utility easement, which would overlay a portion of a residential front yard, and then kind of move that equipment, which is no dispute it's necessary and essential, but move it from the back to the front, where we have concerns about aesthetic impacts, visual impacts, impacts on community character, and kind of this form of development, which doesn't reflect most of the town's prior and existing residential development. So that's what we're hoping to address and avoid by virtue of this action. Lastly, I'm available for comments and questions, and the staff recommendation, my recommendation, would be for approval of the ordinance and for the Planning Commission to recommend Town Council approve the ordinance. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm happy to take questions and comments.
Thank you, John. Questions for John?
I have a couple. My first one is, when we talk about utility easements, we're not just talking about the electric company. Are we also talking about cable and any other gas line,
yes.
Everything, right?
Yes, this was written with general applicability.
Okay, so we're not singling anybody out.
I stand by my answer.
All right. And the next one, when we talk about electrical equipment that would be above ground in an easement area, that's the green boxes that we saw the pictures of in your slide. But does that also include like the poles that they would run electric on if they have above ground electric?
So think about this, and actually we have Corps' Director of Engineering here who may or may not speak to that. We're talking about service infrastructure. Think about transmission, distribution, service down to the individual lot level. So in terms of poles, we're not talking about, let's say, the large monopoles or lattice guy wires for transmission, like
Right.
Xcel's large transmission corridor through the center of town that runs east-west. This is infrastructure that comes in to serve individual lots and individual dwelling units. By code and also by practice, that infrastructure in the main is underground, but for the above-ground equipment, pedestals, transformers, meters, and the like, in the main.
Okay, thank you.
So you said that CORE did not change their
So I'll do.
policy and standards?
We've been told, core staff may address that. In fact, I would ask perhaps if they could address that question, Commissioner Rodell. We were of the belief and understanding that core had changed their policy and standards until yesterday's meeting, when we were told that that was not the case. So other than that, I'll defer to the core representative or representatives on that. We do think that there's still good reason to proceed with the ordinance and the code amendment, because our existing code is so limited and lacking in standards on this issue in its current condition, that going forward and adding standards that reflect the town preference and expectations and provide clarity and certainty, we believe is both important and beneficial. Thank you.
One additional question. Do we know if there's any sister communities that have similar code to what's being proposed here?
I'm not aware of any kind of in the vicinity of the town of Parker. What I can advise the commission of is that this issue is of concern to several other municipalities, including the city of Castle Pines, the town of Castle Rock, the town of Bennett, as well as the city or town of Woodland Park. I can't remember which one it is. So the town has been coordinating review and comment on this topic with those other communities, and we share, I think, overlapping concerns. I would imagine that each community probably has some variation or differences in its concerns, but we have been coordinating and partnering with those 4 other communities that I've mentioned.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Can I just ask, what I'm hearing is that this has been sort of a de facto standard already, and we're really just codifying what is already existing in practice. Is that correct?
That's generally correct.
I think it's important to have a unified standard across at least the town of Parker. And so I really like this idea. I'm wondering if it is in fact different from existing practice, how it differs, if you can address that.
So in the main, the code amendment, so referring to that document in your packet, so the track changes document for section 131090, and it's A through, let's see, A through I. Virtually all of that is new kind of standard and guidance by text, which generally reflects, in most cases specifically reflects, the practice that the town has followed with applicants and with our utility providers and partners with regard to that. Now, there are some exceptions to that. With regard to that, there always are. Every project, every property, every use is unique. And so sometimes there's variation.
So what I'm hearing you say is there have been prior exceptions, but on the whole, this reflects existing town practice.
Yes, as I previously stated, this codifies prior town practice.
Thank you.
If there's a hardship or they want a variance, will that go through planning, or does that have to go to town council?
It will go to town council.
Okay.
Other questions?
Yeah, were there any technical or safety reasons why they want to kind of and I'm sure we can ask them, but I don't know what was shared as to the reasoning.
I'll defer to Core,
Okay,
kind of on
perfect.
operations, safety, their perspective.
Okay.
I think it's most appropriate that they speak for themselves,
That's
Commissioner
fine.
Shapiro.
Okay.
My only question is, is there a setback requirement on the side yard? Is there something that's going to be defined that says, hey, you can't build or place these utilities a certain distance?
So let me, setback in this case, side yard setback and rear yard setback are either coterminous or have overlap with the utility easements we're talking about, but they're really not one and the same. The utility easement right is a grant of a property right in favor of the provider for their purposes, for their means and ends. One of the issues that we've discussed, including yesterday with Core staff, is kind of the character of these easements and what they will allow and not allow as to use and improvements. Core has indicated to us, and I think I can say this, is that they will be open to allowing side and rear yard utility easements, but those easements need to be kept clear of most other non-utility improvements. So think projections into the easement, think window wells into an easement, think stairs into an easement, think foundation systems. There's something called a counterfort, which is part of a foundation and footing for a home, for a structure. Those are typically subsurface and project outward from the home. They can intrude into the easement. So we had a good discussion, a productive discussion yesterday on that and other topics. And we've heard from Core that they will be open to side and rear yard utility easements. Open is my words, is how I characterized it. But with the requirement that those easements either prohibit or limit, in large part, any of those projections into the side and rear yard utility easement for their purposes. We've heard things like access, safety, and the like, and the Core representative may wish to address that as well. And what I would say is, for the moment, I think the town staff understands their position with regard to the easements and the need to keep those clear. And if that conversation continues, we're certainly, I think, that is something we'll have conversation about to see if we can come to an agreement with regard to that.
Understood. Thank you.
And if there's a change in that agreement that affects the code, we may be back in front of you at a future date. But I don't know that sitting here in front of you today.
Last question, is the revision to the policies and standards published somewhere? I was unable to find that information specifically for Core Electric.
But that's maybe a question for them.
Yeah, right. So we don't publish
you're right.
another entity's standards.
Understood.
You can ask, I'm sure they'll be happy to answer that question.
The question specifically for John?
Last thing for John, when you spoke about the impediments that could impede on the easements, my thought immediately went to patio homes and how closely they're put together and how little room there is for any kind of an easement between sets of homes and patio homes, and I know staff will be on top of that. That's all.
That sounded like a statement, not a question.
Well,
I think I would agree staff will be on top of
Yes.
that.
but that was the concern that came to my mind. I just wanted to share that.
And I will, listen, at my own risk, I'll just add on a comment on top of that is, we have additional standards we're proposing by way of this ordinance, but the design of any project, residential, non-residential, and then the subset of design for utility service can be a fairly, depending on the project, the property, the demand for your services, can be a fairly or very complex thing. And every project and property is different, and they all present, despite the fact that we're here proposing and discussing additional standards, I wouldn't claim that they would capture every scenario or circumstance, either as to a property or a development proposal. And so we'll have to go through that process, kind of, if you recommend approval and the council adopts it, to see how they work in practice. And there typically is the need for some variation from standards with some project along the way going forward. I would anticipate that here. I don't know which project that is or which piece of property that is, but that would be pretty typical. That applies to everything: architectural design standards, setbacks, landscaping, and utilities, among others. Thank you.
Okay, again, as this is a public hearing, we offer an opportunity for the public or other members of the public to come forward and speak to the issue before us. You have a 3-minute time limit, and we will open the public hearing part of the meeting right now. If you have a statement, please step forward to the microphone, state your name and address for the record.
Good evening, Commissioners. I am Mark Jargemeyer. I'm the Engineering Director at Core Electric Cooperative, 5496 North US Highway 85, Sedalia, Colorado. I do have some handouts here for you, if I may have you pass these through.
Yeah, just put it on.
I do want to reiterate what Mr. Fusa had to say tonight. We have had a long, collaborative working relationship with the town, and we do expect that to continue. We have similar issues that the town has with some of this stuff, so I don't think this is a new thing to them. It's not new to us. It's something we've been working with them for years, and at least fairly long this year. I will say that the way we handled this was a miscommunication. We did not communicate the way we needed to, and that's on me. We should have done it differently. But the whole problem is that we need to provide safe, reliable, and affordable energy to our community. That hasn't changed and will not. As the developments in your community and neighboring communities have gotten to an increased density, as one of the commissioners mentioned, these side lots that we have historically used for easements are getting harder and harder to use, especially for access. We have to have access to our equipment, to maintain it, to repair it, and to ultimately upgrade it. So you have in front of you several photos that show many different installations. So the first one, you can see a typical location where we have some issues, where we've got window wells built right down the side of that house. For me to get in the backyard and pick that green box, that 1,000-pound green box, I have to be able to get a tracked machine down between that fence and that house, and I simply can't do it. And that's what started this process. We have always had regulations for front and rear lot installations. What we changed was our preference to go to front lot from rear lot. So we do not have a problem with being in the rear. We do not have a problem with only using rear and side, as long as those are kept free. We believe that this ordinance is a black and white response to more of a technicolor kind of problem. You know, that, as Mr. Fusa said, nothing we do will solve every problem here. And so we believe that the ordinance as written is likely premature, maybe a little bit poorly executed, as we believe there are some unintended consequences that go along with this that will limit development within the town. So one more time, we're not against rear and side lot easements as long as they are maintained. Any questions?
Can we ask questions from public comment?
No, we have to wait till all the public comments, till we close it, and then we'll come back to questions.
Thank you.
My name is Lucas Schneider. I'm outside counsel for CORE. I'm with Stinson LLP at 1144 15th Street, Denver. Thank you for your time. I'm going to try to answer questions that I heard. Commissioner Lane, you asked whether the ordinance just codifies current practice. To that, I'm going to take a raise of hands. How many of you have sewer and water laterals in the backs of your home running to your homes?
They probably wouldn't know that.
I don't either. All utilities under this would have to now run in the rears of homes. That includes gas, water, electric, anything you can imagine that's a utility. So Commissioner Franson, you asked whether CORE changed its policies. In August, CORE updated its policies, but the updated policy of CORE to this day allows for front, side, and rear installation of CORE's electrical utilities with typical suggested footage for the width to allow for access so that CORE can continue to provide safe, reliable, maintainable electrical service. We've been in communication with the town and the town's outside counsel since early September about that. We've shared the revisions. We've explained that. Those are the two questions that I heard that are most pertinent. Were there any other ones? Commissioner Nelson, did you ask something about any of the language?
The only other question was where the policy was published so that we could have looked at it before this meeting.
It's online. It's on CORE's website. It's
Yeah, I
it's in a
looked.
couple tabs.
I never found it.
No, but let's not get into that now.
Sorry.
Sure.
All right.
All right. Well, I think of an acronym when I look at this ordinance, and it's SALEE. Signals, traffic signals will no longer be allowed to be installed in the fronts of homes. The A, all utilities are going to have to be in the rear lots of homes under this. The L, lights, even street lights, they have to be, under this new ordinance change, installed in the rears of homes to light the fronts of homes. E, the easements alongside homes. This ordinance doesn't protect those easements so that CORE can still get to the boxes in the rears of homes to provide safe, reliable, maintainable energy. And last but not least, the exception. The hardship exception stands to become the rule, meaning the town council is going to very regularly have to review plans that otherwise the planning commission would have. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no other, we will close the public hearing portion of the meeting.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, I apologize for interrupting. I think Commissioner Franzen had a question on safety, and I just wanted to, I'm sorry, Commissioner Shapiro, and wanted to ask if that question had been answered to your satisfaction.
Well, I think as they described, what they do and why they need that access, they kind of addressed that it wasn't really a technical reason, but more of an access reason, and really more that the way the side setbacks are, it inhibits their ability to service the equipment. So that kind of answered my question.
Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize for the interruption.
No problem. All right. Any further questions for John?
John, the attorney who spoke raised a couple of issues that I wondered if you would like to address, like we would have to put street lights in the side and backyards, and we would have to put, all the future water and, our sewer utilities are going to have to be in the backyard. Would you like to address that in terms of how this does or does not, in your opinion, require that?
So happy to do that, Commissioner Nelson. What I'll start, though, is kind of my answer, the staff answer, which is we disagree with their attorney. Respectfully disagree. We've reviewed the proposal against municipal code for conflicts. So we disagree with the conflicts he's enumerated. So, for example, traffic signals. Those are typically placed within town right-of-way. If there's an unusual circumstance where it can't be placed within town right-of-way, they're typically placed within a tract. That tract typically is either owned by the town or has public use for it. as well, so by way of example. For water and sewer, the code has a specific passage and provision that refers to other standards which are applicable to the town's 3 water and sewer districts and providers. So we don't see any conflict there. And so I think generally, I can go on, but we've reviewed it. We disagree in the main with the identified enumerated conflicts. We don't believe that they exist. We do acknowledge that every ordinance, whether it's a new one or an amended ordinance and code provisions, can't anticipate every future circumstance or eventuality. And so there may be some issues with the administration and application of this ordinance in the future. That would be typical of any ordinance and any amendment to code. And when that happens, we will review it and work through it. And if it requires a further code amendment to resolve and address, we will be back in front of the commission and the council to do that.
Another question I have is, we were given a handout. I don't know that the public got to see what we were just given, but there are various photographs of where the Corps clearly has legitimate issues with being able to access. There's a picture of one of the green boxes in a corner of a fence with a tree in front of it. Very difficult to service. Someone put a parking bollard in front of the door so you can't open the door to access the equipment, that sort of thing. Are there other places in our code that address how these things can be prevented in order to make things accessible and safe for the Corps employees?
So we welcome and support Corps enforcing their easement with regard to this and any obstructions within it. We would be supportive of that. I think that's probably part of a future conversation with them that is beyond the reach of this code amendment, and it's not addressed by it, but we certainly support them enforcing their easement rights where there are those conflicts, particularly kind of post-construction completion and post-issuance of a certificate of occupancy. The town only knows that a property owner or the occupant of a property has made an alteration when they come forward to ask us ask us first, does it require town approval, site plan approval, plat approval, a building permit? And then if the answer is yes, we do a review process, and we have what we call referral review. Depending on the kind of application and town approval sought, that would often go to outside agencies, including but not limited to Corps, for review. Post-approval entitlement during construction up to construction completion, issuance of certificate of occupancy and actual occupancy, the town has a role through plan review, first, let's say, plat review, site plan review, where we share those documents in our referral review process with internal and outside agencies, including, but not limited to Corps. We do that, we'll continue to do that, so they'll have a chance to review, and they do. They do a very good job and work closely with the town and town staff in that review process. Post-construction approval and construction inspection, the town also has a role in partnering with a provider, in this case Corps by example, in terms of construction inspection to a limited degree, but it is not our easement to enforce in the main. So we think we have a supportive role in that, and we're welcome, and we certainly are open to doing that, and perhaps even strengthening that review with them. But that's all outside of this code amendment. That's more administrative practice and process. And we talked about that at yesterday's meeting, which was, I think, the first real working meeting on this topic that should have happened months ago. I'm hopeful that conversation will continue. We'll be talking about that issue, the town's administrative practice and process around that, and how we can help Corps support their easement rights and partner with them with regard to that to prevent that kind of intrusion into an easement area.
Who pays for easement enforcement or enforcement to remove something that's infringed on an easement? Is that a property owner, or is that?
So
my question making sense?
Whichever individual or entity, hypothetically, and again, this is just a hypothetical, whichever individual or entity caused the infraction or the violation or the intrusion into an easement where it's not allowed, that individual or entity is responsible for abating and removing it.
Understood.
Whether it's a homeowner, a business that's a tenant in a building, an owner-occupant of a building, of a warehouse or an office building.
And then my only other question too is, the language as worded, is it overly restrictive? What I'm wondering is if there are situations where an easement, or I'm sorry, utility absolutely has to be placed in the front yard, is this language too restrictive to not permit that? And is that something that would need to then go back to town council? Sorry, go ahead, John.
So good question. I'm smiling because we've had that conversation internally amongst town staff, including and with core staff. The language on the waiver or modification or variation from the standards is deliberately narrow, and it's deliberately narrow after discussion and consultation with the town council with regard to that. So the language you see reflects both staff review and work product and consultation and direction from the town council. It's a high bar. It's deliberately narrow. Could there be an applicant in the future that's unable to meet the standard, the A through Y, and also unable to apply for a waiver or a modification because of how it's constructed, narrowly constructed? Commissioner Franzen, the answer is yes. In that case, their remedy would be to either evaluate further modifying the planning and design of their project to come into compliance, attempt to demonstrate a hardship, which they can do, and only the council would be able to decide the way the ordinance is constructed with regard to that, or potentially and hypothetically request or petition for an amendment to the code.
Okay.
I just had a quick comment about the photos. Really, only 2 of these really show something that appears to be a new construction that seems like it could have been addressed during design, right? And when you look at like a basement window well that goes out into the setback, if truly the setback is not up to the property line in this photo, right? All the other ones seem to be owner-induced problems that they've introduced. I have one of these units in my backyard, and it basically tells you where you can, like, don't put plants right in front of it, don't put around it. Obviously, people don't read that or ignore it and do that anyways, right? So, but really only the 2 of these that were in here really kind of reflect what really could be addressed by Parker, right? And go ahead.
Yeah, the answer is yes. I don't know which pictures I don't have a copy of the pictures.
No, that's
handed
okay,
out,
yeah.
nor am I going to come up and get them. But I think I do know kind of what the pictures depict. I don't know. I don't recall if Mr. Jurgemeyer said that those pictures were all from Parker, or if they were in other case. What I can tell you is that we know that there are that there are residential properties that have obstructions in their side, particularly the side yard easement, sometimes the rear yard easement, and we know that that's a challenge for CORE. Maybe it's more than a challenge. Maybe it's a problem for CORE. We know that. We understand that. We think that going forward, if the town council, if the commission recommends approval of the ordinance, and if the council actually approves the ordinance on Monday night, in terms of the administration and application of the amended code and the standards in it, we will have to continue conversations with the utility providers, including but not limited to CORE, about how they apply, about how we partner together to make sure that those intrusions into the required side and rear yard easements are avoided and prevented so that they're kept clear, so that the utility providers, including Core, can safely install both the infrastructure at initial development and then maintain it as necessary, whether it's a failure in a line, a transformer, or a pedestal, so they can get access to the side and rear yard and not have to climb over with equipment window wells. Right. You know, among other things. We're squeezed between two staircases, and we certainly have a role partnering with them to achieve kind of that goal and requirement for the clear easements, particularly during development review, design review, so plat review, which you see quite often during review of building and construction permits, and then during the limited phase of construction inspection, once those grading and building permits have been issued, and prior to completion and issuance of a certificate of occupancy. We've been working with Core on this for many years. It's been a very good working relationship. I expect that's going to continue. That's an issue that we know exists. We hear their concern and understand their position, and we think there's opportunity to work, assuming an approval, actually assuming anything. We don't have any choice but to work together. But assuming council approves the ordinance Monday evening or at a future date, to work through the administration so the developer and property owner meets their goals, so the utility providers are able to provide the service they're required to provide in an adequate, safe way, and the town can ensure that its standards are complied with and respected by all parties. That's always been kind of a cooperative working partnership with applicants, developers, and the utility providers. There have been gaps and misses. There's no doubt about that, and I wouldn't say otherwise. And we expect that would be an important conversation going forward. And I'm reasonably optimistic we can come to an outcome that's agreeable and satisfactory towards that end.
Do we have a lot of properties that have it in the front in Parker? Even though it's not specified in the ordinance?
There are some properties. The one neighborhood where it's prevalent is the overlook at Cherry Creek residential neighborhood. I forget who that developer was. Might be D.R. Horton. It's on Motzenbacher Road, just south of Main Street, Clark Farms, immediately east of American Academy Charter School. Right. Where, for any number of reasons, but including the fact that was a difficult development site with steeply sloping terrain.
Yes.
From Motzenbacher at the high point, sloping down to the Cherry Creek floodplain, it resulted in the need to really heavily terrace the site to hold grade, and it has a lot of retaining walls and structure to hold grade, and that's certainly, we've heard from our colleagues and friends at Core, that's a real challenge for them in approving designs with side and rear yard easements where you've got retaining walls either in the easement, which would be no-go, or right on the easement. And so that's a neighborhood where that front yard setback issue actually occurred. So the two pictures I showed you are from that neighborhood. We were hopeful that was a one-time exception, knowing the terrain and topography there. We became very worried when what we believed to be was a core change in policy and standards was made known to us by Core staff, by developers and other communities. We're still sorting through what we've heard that nothing's changed. I think that'll be a topic for more conversation. But I kind of revert back to it's my opinion and my recommendation that the commission and the council proceed with the ordinance, again, to accomplish the things I articulated and fill what I think are some limitations in the current ordinance. And if in forward conversations with Core and other providers, there's a need for amendments to the ordinance as it's currently proposed, we would have no hesitation to come back to the commission and the council for a discussion or request for further amendment. We amend code all the time, as you know. You see, very often, if they involve development and land use, you see them. You saw the one that Bryce presented this evening. There'll certainly be more. It's just kind of routine. We're always revising to address issues, to respond to priorities from the town council, to address problems, or to just improve the code and promote better outcomes.
Thanks, John.
Thank you.
I have one more question. I think that we, as a town of Parker, we probably want to have a good relationship with all of the utility vendors, and I just wonder if you think it's possible to have a discussion with the utility providers and come up with a mutual solution before enacting this ordinance?
So Commissioner Lane, I'll go, but my recommendation is to proceed with the ordinance. Discussions with the utility providers, including but not limited to CORE, can continue. We're certainly happy to have those conversations. Frankly, it's our job. We have to do that. And if those discussions result in agreements and outcomes that would require further revision to the code section that you have in front of you tonight, whether to address problems or limitations or just promote better outcomes, to use a term, we would do that. Code can always be amended at any time for any reason.
I understand that. I just wonder if it would be better to table the ordinance for now in order to have more productive discussions and then make any necessary or suggested amendments to the ordinance and adopt it all at one time.
Thank you. I recommend the commission proceed. I'll be recommending the council proceed Monday evening.
Further question?
No.
I do have, sorry, I've been sitting on this. I understand you can't look at these pictures, and it makes perfect sense when you see houses. So during the planning phase, everybody is given the site plan. The town of Parker, CORE, whoever, everybody gets it. Who says, and the developer understands this. So why, I guess, if there's nothing in Parker that allows homes to be built too close, or is there something in our code which would allow buildings, Commissioner Nelson brought up, the dual homes, and I know sometimes those have to be put on the side, but is there something in our code that says homes must be X number of feet apart? And I'm sure there is. I don't know exactly, I don't know the verbiage, but if you look at any of your, your legal documents for your homes, it usually says you can't build anything within 30 feet of, your easement or whatever. So is this a problem? Are we creating do we even have a problem with CORE, or does the town cover that enough that this is going to be a non-event and we can put everything in the backyards?
So again, good question, Commissioner Rodell. I think that's an important question. I think I'm going to try and answer it in two ways and hope I at least come close. Tell me if I don't. Back to kind of the application of this ordinance, assuming the commission recommends its approval to the council and assuming the council approves it, staff will have to kind of look at the implications for how we administer, what's its impact on development review. So site plans and plats that we review that very, very often you'll see and make a decision on in public hearing. So we'll have to consider that. We already are thinking about some amendments and alterations to our administrative process. Number one, to respond to these standards, but I think also to respond to some of the comments and conversation that CORE had with us and vice versa yesterday in terms of making sure easements, any easements, in this case side rear yard easements, are kept clear. So that's kind of all to be determined, but I'm optimistic that we'll come to a good outcome, and I think it will require some revision to the town's administrative process. And we would kind of first try to wrap our head around that and figure out what those changes are. We would then kind of, before implementing them and finalizing them, we would then consult with our partners, in this case, including but not limited to CORE and CORE staff. So that's number one. Number two is maybe more on point. To your question about setbacks, and as they relate to utility easements, the town code, land development ordinance, and the plan, more importantly, the plan development zoning documents, of which there are 80, 85 plus, do have bulk standards, including front, rear, and side yard setback standards. Very often, though, those were proposed and approved many years ago, with the applicant, the developer, wanting as much flexibility as possible. That flexibility kind of exhibits itself not only in what I like to call kitchen sink zoning, where you can have a whole range of uses that sometimes seem really broad to town staff, including community development staff, but also bulk standards that are very limited and narrow. They kind of the minimum bulk standards, setback standards one would expect. So in a residential zone district, in a residential planning area of a planned development, they could be as limited as a requirement for a minimum 5-foot side yard setbacks, minimum 20-foot rear yard setbacks, minimum 15 to 20-foot front yard setbacks. Again, these are approved documents, so we all have to abide by them. That seems, particularly with the plan development zoning documents, to have been the strategy, no surprise, by developers and investors to maximize their flexibility. And we get that, but it is a challenge. And with the market pressures, with land being so expensive, as we know, the cost of development being so expensive, kind of the market signal to developers is to maximize their unit count or lot count. And so and maximize their price to deal with high land costs, high construction costs, expensive everything. So we're getting expensive homes that are big on increasingly smaller lots. Everything's getting squeezed. And one of the I think real evidence of that squeeze is we have these very big homes or fairly big homes on increasingly smaller lots that squeeze down to the bare minimum required setback. So 5 yard each side of a home for a side yard setback, 20 feet rear yard setback, 15 to 20 feet front yard setback. It's in the absence of zoning amendments and rezoning to change bulk standards like setbacks, we have to allow that to happen if that was all previously proposed and approved. An applicant can propose to amend those setbacks, but nobody's proposing these days to increase side yard setbacks, right? I mean, we know that. I think that's kind of where you're headed. The town has the right to do that and rezone with or without property owner approval, but the town is very reluctant to take that action in general anyway, and certainly very reluctant to take that action without property owner support and approval.
So, hypothetical, a developer comes in with a set of plans, and we have voted on this, and it virtually, it doesn't give any wiggle room, and I understand the ongoing conversations, and I have the same concerns that Jane has about, we're just, all of a sudden, we're just shutting the door and saying this is the way it is. Does CORE have the opportunity to say, we can't do this safely, we're not putting in utilities in this development? You can't hold public utilities from the public kind of deal, but do they have that option to say, we can't work with this tight space, putting these in the rear, and the side yards are, again, nobody's increasing?
I'm going to defer that question to a CORE representative, because that's not a town decision, right? That in that hypothetical, it would be a CORE decision.
Okay.
I don't know how they would make that decision, and if they would refuse to approve or refuse to serve.
Already closed that part of that.
Okay, so I guess I can't ask that. Okay.
We can ask that, we just can't, because it's a public comment, we've already closed public comment, we can't have a response.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, Commissioner Riddle, for trying to pass it off to.
No. That's, I just,
the
I want to
applicant. I didn't want to
understand
answer
that
for the
if we vote
provider.
on
We
this
don't-
as it is, and I understand, we
Right.
know you guys, there's no doubt in my mind that Parker is going to do everything in their power to work with developers. However, it's just so restrictive, and that's my concern.
And I understand, and I hear you loud and clear, and I think that all I can say about that is that issue of kind of in terms of exceptions, the waiver or modification exceptions to standards, we had quite a bit of internal discussion at the staff level about that topic, about how narrowly or broadly to construct the text and the language on that. We have direction from town council to proceed on the basis of the code amendments in front of you. And I think I'll leave it at that.
Roxy, you had?
I do have a question, and I was going to ask almost a similar question. Are we in alignment with easement width and our setback requirements here in Parker? But so only half that question remains. Do we know the common service level easement width? I mean, he said the ability to get a vehicle in there that can lift and pick these.
Since it's closed and they can't
I know, I was just curious if you knew. Is it
Core
5 foot,
has
10 foot?
standards for the kind of the nature and dimensions of the easements, the widths that they use. They've shared with us. In fact, we discussed them yesterday, and I believe we'll be continuing to discuss them. What kind of apparatus, equipment, vehicles they with operations they utilize, I can't speak to that.
Sure.
You know, I can't speak to that, but I think we've all seen Core staff accessing locations on foot in some cases, right? Walking in. We've seen Core trucks and vehicles, you know, whether parked at the curb or adjacent to developed areas. And then as we heard from Mr. Jurgemeier, they even when they have to replace a transformer, it's even beyond that, right? They have to bring in a very expensive, large, and heavy piece of equipment to lift out the old transformer and put in the new equipment, and I imagine that's quite an operation. So they access their easements for their purposes in all kinds of ways. I think that's probably, I'm going to stop there.
Right, yeah. No, I was just curious if there was kind of a general dimension, 10-foot wide easement, you know, recorded on title type thing.
They have standards for easement dimensions, especially width. They've shared that with us, and frankly, developers and other municipalities in their service territory, we know what they are. So that's, for example, the minimum 5-foot wide side yard easement. They've got dimensions for the other easements as well.
Okay.
We know what they do in them, but I mean, how they get people and equipment in and out, I can't speak to.
Yeah, no, that's the
And I don't think that's really material, Commissioner Collette, for the purposes of the action in front of you, which is the ordinance amendment on town standards.
Right, no, I was just curious to make sure that there's an alignment, because this is at least in my opinion, this is an ordinance, and I think we need it, but that's my opinion here. The city developers and the utilities are already working together, and these pictures show elements of failures in that. I think this ordinance will kind of help keep things more structured. I have concerns about the window wells and things like that, and access, of course, but I just wanted to kind of see if there was a standard that we were all kind of in alignment with.
What I would say is the side yard setback standards for detached homes, they're not less than 5 feet. For attached product, paired homes, townhomes, I mean, by definition, right, they're connected. So for a paired home, 2 paired homes side by side, you're only going to have, for those 2 lots, 2 homes, 2 side yards, 1 on each property, because they're connected in the center at the common property line. That can be a challenge. That's fairly dense for Parker housing product and fairly small lots. That can be, and I believe will be, a challenge for the standards in front of us and for applicants complying both with our ordinance and with CORE's policy and standards for design of, you know, of their infrastructure and their easement areas. It can be done. These are design, you know, from speaking for the town and I want to speak for developers. Generally, these are design questions and exercises, so they can be solved. Now, they're influenced by other factors, right? Cost being one. I mean, so we'll have to see.
Okay, thank you.
All right. That concludes questions. So we will close the public hearing at 8:19. Commissioner discussion.
I have a bunch. The first thing I want to do is to see if we can include the packet that was given to us by Corps' attorney in the public record.
I'm going to have to seek advice on that. I don't know. We can see.
Because I'd like anybody who's reviewing this in the future to be able to see the handout that we've had, just so that it's a public record. The second thing that I want to discuss is that I used to work for a title company, and so we did new construction, and as part of our closings, at least one of our closers would point out the setbacks on the survey. Now, when you're doing a resale, there's generally not a survey. I also think that I understand Corps' inclination to make the pedestals and transformers more accessible based on their problems that they encounter. But I do think, like someone said, that it is sort of Corps' responsibility to enforce those easements. So if homeowners are not properly doing their landscaping to maintain those easements, that's something that actually is not the town's responsibility. Now, it is the town's responsibility to make sure nothing is built within those easements, but actually maintaining those easements is each homeowner's problem. I also think that I like the town of Parker's idea about how to maintain visual clarity and to refrain from installing above-ground utilities in front yards where that is possible. That's it for now.
I mean, I generally support the goal that John has, but I do recognize the fact that some of this seems to be administrative in nature, right? Because all the utilities have access to these, the plats and understanding what's being built and where their boxes would be, right? And if they see two streets come together and they don't have access to where those boxes are, that seems to be something that needs to be addressed at that time. So I have struggles with with Corps' objection to having that type of ordinance and understanding that it seems like this is more of an administrative issue that that we're trying to solve. And I think if the builders and the town are following and doing the reviews, I think a lot of this seems like it could be avoided.
I agree. It is, at least three of us tried to find the core policy that was referenced at the beginning of this whole presentation. None of us were able to find it on their website. So, Core, if you're listening, maybe you want to talk to your web designer. You had a question, Kim, about the ability to refuse service. That's actually addressed in the proposed ordinance under H2. If the utility has refused to provide service and said decision is upheld by the Colorado Public Utilities Commission, in that case, then it would be waived. So in that extreme case, but it also addresses very well the situation we have in the highly sloped terraced areas, that would fall under the exception given under H1, which is a reason of exceptional topographic conditions or other extraordinary and exceptional situations. So I think that it covers those types of things, including perhaps even those areas where the properties are so close together. That would be another exceptional situation that, town council would be able to deal with then. I think that the ordinance is well-written. I think that there is an easement enforcement issue, and to the extent that town council, that the town staff is willing to work with CORE to help figure that out, or, either through inspection or building inspection, that sort of thing. Let's see. So I am going to vote in favor of recommending that this be passed, because I believe that most of it can be handled with easement enforcement. A lot of it can be handled with a closer look at the design elements when things are forwarded to CORE to say, here, look, this is what the guy wants to do. This is what our developer wants to do, and the developer has put a window well in their easement. They should come back and say, we can't have a window well in our easement. I think that's on CORE, as well as the ability of staff to help them recognize where that's going to be an issue. So again, and I know that once we pass this, it's not the last word on it, and I think that moving this ordinance forward will help encourage additional communication between CORE and staff going forward for any possible amendments to the ordinance we might need. So I am in favor of this ordinance.
So I have a little bit of a different opinion. I'm going to take CORE on their good faith by saying they're not opposed to backyard easements. They've said it. They're not saying that they're only doing front yard. They're willing to do front, side, and back. But when back is so restrictive that they can't do it for safety reasons or there isn't enough room, the ordinance, other than going to the extreme with the Public Utilities Commission, basically says you will put these in the side or back. And so I just think we're being too restrictive up front. I think there can be ongoing discussion, and I think I don't think it would take a lot of different wording to change this to make it such that there would be like an option to discuss with staff, the option to put in certain cases utilities in the side or front yards. I also believe our staff is more than willing to work with CORE. I think the two entities are after the main goal. However, I worry about putting restrictions in and then they're in place. And it's a lot harder to withdraw restrictions than it is to slowly build them up to what you find to be needed for the final product.
Kim, I totally respect that, but I just want to point out, it does say that if there's a hardship related to exceptional narrowness, shallowness, or shape of a specific piece of property, in addition to the exceptional topographic conditions, et cetera, and I really felt that addressed your concern. That's under H1 in the language. So if you don't feel that's enough, I respect that. But I feel that that's been covered by that language.
So bigger picture, my thoughts, right, is this isn't necessarily a discussion between CORE. It impacts CORE, it impacts a bunch of utilities, but this is more about maintaining or codifying standards that are already in place for our community, right? Mm-hmm. Maintaining, visually pleasing neighborhoods and areas. For me, that's important to me as a resident of Parker and as somebody that wants other people to live in Parker. Having an aesthetically pleasing property is super important to me. I guess I don't have a lot more to add on that, but I am supportive of this code, knowing that dialogue is absolutely necessary and needed. But I think this is critical to maintaining the standards of the town of Parker.
I'm just going to jump in. Ruth Ann, thank you so much for stealing everything I was going to say.
Oh, well, I'm sorry.
No, actually, you said it better than I could have. And I am in agreement with you, and I am for this. I think it is well-written. I think it does give an out for situations of narrowness, topographical difficulties, and things like that. And I wasn't prepared for this part, but you did say, and I believe you're correct, that this will help encourage more communication between the utilities in the town and the developments as they come out and as they roll forward. Yeah, Eric as well, agree with you. This just helps codify something that we already, it's a standard that we kind of talk about, feel about, and know about Parker. And I like putting it in writing. I like putting it in the ordinance, and I am for it.
It's what we've come to expect.
Well, I guess I'll give my 2 cents here as well, and in big picture kinds of things. Certainly in my years of being in this county, I have seen the exact things. I didn't need the pictures to tell me what that looks like. You know, I've been around enough houses and I've seen enough new developments go in where people are doing all the things you said there. But again, I have also seen, whether it's XL or Core or whoever, go in and cut people's trees down when the lines go through, and they'll just cut them down. They don't ask, they just cut them down. And they'll overturn your shrubs and stuff to get to those boxes. So, I mean, they have a right to that easement, and I am in full support of that right. And many of these things are homeowner issues. And I think, as somebody said, if you build a window well in the easement, well, something went wrong between when those plans were done and when the easements were laid out and that kind of thing. But, I mean, the other stuff it's just a homeowner stuff, and people do lots of crazy stuff. But anyway, I'm certainly in support of, I think, as was said over here, the beginning of that dialogue of, this gives us a place to start talking about this kind of stuff and addressing it, and both from the homeowner standpoint and from the town and from Core as well. So I am in support of it. Do we have a motion?
I move the Planning Commission recommend Town Council approve an ordinance to amend the Parker Municipal Code regarding utilities to provide updated standards for the location and design of utility easements to individual lots in connection with new development applications.
I second.
It's been moved by Eric, seconded by Ruth Ann, that Planning Commission recommend Town Council approve an ordinance to amend the Parker Municipal Code regarding utilities to provide updated standards for the location and design of utility easements to individual lots in connection with new development applications. I'll call the question. Kim?
Nay.
Ira?
Aye.
Eric?
Aye.
Ruth Ann?
Aye.
Roxy?
Aye.
Jane?
Aye.
Chair is yes, and so it passes 6-1, and it's on to council. All right. Bryce, I guess we have an update from you on item 9?
Yes, so your next meeting date on October 27th, just a reminder, at 5:30 there'll be ongoing education. It'll start, and following that will be a study session on the proposed park manual.
Okay. Do we have a move to adjourn?
I move to adjourn the Planning Commission meeting.
I second.
All right. Kim? Ira?
Aye.
Eric?
Aye.
Ruth Ann?
Aye.
Roxy?
Aye.
Jane?
Aye.
Chair is aye. I guess we get to go home.